Hello and welcome. Why not come a little closer? That's better. Much better. I'm here at the Missouri Review with the poet. Her name is Diane Seuss. Her work appears in the summer 2011 issue of the Missouri Review. I will ask her questions. She will respond. How are you, Diane?
I'm doing well, despite being generally ravaged, thank you. I'm on sabbatical for a couple of more months and I'm finishing up a manuscript. New dog, new tricks, new lease on life. The works.
I'd like to ask about your poems. There are two in the magazine, one called White Violet, not so much an image, in which you include references to and quotes from the likes of Paul Valery and Nathaniel Hawthorne. The poem benefits from these references in ways that are self-evident, but how would you articulate what the poems gain from these intertextual associations?
Great question. I am fluid. I associate. I may not contain multitudes, but I have a slippery mind. Both Valery and Hawthorne were literary presences in my early development as a writer, so they wormed their way into this poem, which seems to be about a certain wholeness, a certain innocence of seeing and integrity of body, that is dismantled necessarily by experience. It was difficult for me to hear their music and wisdom, because they were great literary men to whom I was introduced by great literary men, who intimidated, repelled and seduced me. Where does a working-class girl from southwest Lower Michigan stand in relation to Valery, Hawthorne and their ilk? It's only now, through memory, that I can make use of them by integrating them into my own improvisation. This poem, to be intertextual, is to symbolically open my arms, a bit, and with great ambivalence. But I don't swallow them. I ask them to dance.
Wonderful. Now let's talk about your longer poem, I Can't Listen to Music, especially Lush Life. This poem moves like a long train of thought, with the speaker presenting an image, which plunges her into a place in her mind or her memory, and black out again. The sum of this is that we become very intimate with this speaker. I suppose my question is, how did you go about shaping this person? Did you have an idea of who this was, and then fill in the blanks, or did the lines accrue to form the image of a psyche? Or neither? If the poem is autobiographical, that certainly simplifies things, but perhaps the question is still valid.
It's tangentially autobiographical, but you really are getting at one of my central concerns as a writer, which is how we construct ourselves, both in life and on the page, and how insubstantial that person/speaker/self really is. Maybe the speaker's wispy, unreliable construction is what I mean by tenderness. A page is such a flimsy membrane between speaker and reader, and language is so watery. It dies and resurrects before our very eyes. A poem or a piece of music or memory is like a bloom, which is the defining image of the poem, so fleeting, so hypersensitive, like sex, like dying. In answer to your question about how one builds such a speaker, I can only say that yes, she is formed as lines accrue, and those lines emerge, vine-like, from a swill of memory and feeling whose potency has the power to kill. This is why I summoned up the ghosts of Billy Strayhorn, composer of Lush Life, and Lorca, both of whom were impaled on lushness in all of its forms. I needed their presences, if not their guidance, as I wrote.
With images like that of the boy who tore into my mouth, and of gold petals like a nipple bitten black, there is a certain violence to this poem, or so I would describe some of its images. It gives great, immediate insight into the speaker you've presented us with, among other things. Where did the writing of this poem begin? And at what point did these striking images enter into it?
The poem literally began with the blooming season, a period of deep remembering, and my inability to bear listening to Lush Life, a song of lush despair and desperate lushness, all enough to make the jittery self implode. Opening comes at such a price, as does remembering openness. Blooming is fatal, as is not blooming. The poem began with that conundrum, which I experienced as a full frontal assault during a particularly beautiful walk. Everything buzzed with luxurious self-exposure. Yes, you're right. The sexuality in this poem is fierce, with an edge of sadism. Beauty is sadistic. It does not last. Those images arrived as I looked at flowers closely, their sharp, arched anatomy, their golden innards, often invaded by bees. Remembering sex, love lost, can be a toothsome enterprise.
It can be a tiresome question, but I am curious to know what poets, or what writers in general, you have been reading with enthusiasm lately.
I am reading Dia Powell, Matthew Harvey, A. Van Jordan, Lynn Emanuel's new book News and Hook, Dina Levin's new book Sky Burial, Heather Cousin's Something in the Potato Room. Gerald Stern's work makes me restless to write my own. I've learned about alternative structures from Kid Mike Cohan's book The Narrow Road to the Interior. Laura Kosciuszko's poems have taught me so much about aerating a line, among many other things, like how to write pretty lines that encounter horrendous truths. I am inspired by Whitman's Queenie Largesse, his operatic ecstasy, and Dickinson's Queenie tiptoeing and tee-heeing as she perches on her volcano and blasphemes from behind her hand. I'm about ready to open Ashbery's translation of Rimbaud's Illuminations.
It's been wonderful to speak with you, and to read your poems. Thank you for making this appearance.
Thank you. Loved the challenge.